Welcome, everyone, to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're tackling something really fundamental to how we communicate. It's about, navigating new situations.
Right, like moving to a new city, maybe starting a new job.
Exactly. Or even just like getting your head around a tricky subject. How do we get the best advice? And just as importantly, how do we give it clearly?
And how do we talk about things that are necessary or things we're obliged to do?
Precisely. So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to explore the fascinating world of English modals.
Those little auxiliary verbs that pack a big punch.
They really do. We're focusing specifically on the ones that talk about obligation, necessity, and advice.
And this isn't just about memorizing grammar rules, is it? It's more about understanding the subtle power these words have.
Totally. It's about the precision they bring to our communication, making sure we convey exactly the right level of, say, urgency or recommendation.
Understanding the strategy behind choosing must over should, for example.
And to make this really practical, we're starting with some great source material. It's a really natural conversation.
Right, between two colleagues, Jack and Claire.
Yeah, Jack's moving to Hong Kong in about a month.
And Claire used to live there, so she's giving him the lowdown.
It's the perfect kind of real-world scenario where these modals just pop up naturally, giving advice, talking about rules.
Exactly. It's our springboard into the grammar. From that conversation, we'll then kind of zoom in on the rules themselves.
We'll look at must, have to, need to, should, ought to.
And crucially, tackle those tricky bits, like the difference between mustn't and don't have to. That one catches so many people out.
Oh, definitely. It's a classic. We'll look at usage rules, common mistakes, and work through some practical examples too.
The goal is really to understand the why behind the rules, not just the what.
So, by the end of this deep dive, the idea is that you, listening in, will feel much more confident.
Not just spotting these modals.
But actually choosing the right one,
Right.
For whatever situation you're in.
Whether you're asking for advice, giving a really strong suggestion, or stating something that's absolutely required.
You'll have the tools to be clear, precise, and, effective. It's about the impact of your words.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's set the scene, Jack. 1 month until Hong Kong. He's talking to Claire, who's the expert here. She's lived there.
Right. And you can feel the pressure on Jack straight away.
Yeah, his first big worry is finding somewhere to live. His company's only putting him up at a hotel for a week.
That's not long in a place like Hong Kong.
Not at all. So he tells Claire, and this is his exact wording, I've got to find somewhere to live quite quickly.
I've got to. That's interesting, isn't it? It's not just stating a fact.
No, it really conveys that urgency, that personal internal pressure he feels.
It's not a law, it's his immediate problem. He feels compelled. Very common in spoken English, have got to.
And Claire immediately jumps in with some advice, drawing on her experience. She says, you'll need to allow a bit of extra time to get over the jet lag.
Need to. Again, not a rule from on high.
No, it's practical necessity. It's about his well-being, his ability to function.
She's basically saying, look, this is essential if you want things to go smoothly. It's strong advice based on practical reality.
It's a great example of how need to often works, a strong suggestion about what's indispensable for a good result.
Yeah, and she just naturally weaves these modals into her advice about Hong Kong life.
Okay, so accommodation. Claire mentions flats are often smaller there.
Which is pretty standard for Hong Kong.
But she says you can find bigger places further out, like on Lama Island. But then she tells a story about a friend who lived there.
Right, what was the catch?
The commute.
Mm-hmm.
She says the only problem was he had to get up really early to catch the ferry to work.
Had to. That's key. It wasn't his choice.
Exactly. It was imposed by the situation, where he lived, the ferry schedule, that dictated his morning routine.
An external necessity in the past. Classic had to.
Then they talk transport.
Mm.
Claire's apparently a big fan of the MTR, the subway system.
Calls it fantastic, yeah. Super efficient, trains constantly.
And she compares it to back home, saying, you don't have to wait for ages like we do here.
You don't have to. The absence of necessity, it's a relief, isn't it?
It really is. It means you're not forced to wait. You have the freedom not to. It's a positive thing.
And she follows that up with a recommendation. You should try and use it whenever you can.
Should. Straightforward advice. I think this is a good idea.
Makes sense, based on her positive experience.
Then she mentions these public light buses. Sounds a bit more complicated.
Apparently so. What's the advice there?
Claire warns him, You'll have to learn some Cantonese if you want to take one of those.
Have to, but conditional this time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not a general rule for living there. It's only if he chooses that specific action, taking those buses, then the necessity arises.
A requirement linked to a choice. Good example.
And the Star Ferry gets a rave review, too. Claire insists, you really have to see it to believe it.
Really have to. Okay, so not a law, obviously.
No, but using have to like that, especially with really,
Yeah.
makes it super strong advice.
Almost like saying it's non-negotiable for the Hong Kong experience. It's so good, it's practically mandatory in her eyes.
Yeah, your visit won't be complete otherwise, that kind of feeling.
And then a more general tip.
Yep. About money for transport. You should always carry plenty of loose change, though, for the buses and the ferries.
Always. Okay, so ongoing advice for convenience.
Right. Not a strict rule, but just sensible practice to avoid hassle.
Makes sense. What about language lessons? Does Jack ask about those?
He does. He asks, very simply, do you think I should take them?
And Claire's response?
Very emphatic. Oh, definitely. You must have lessons if you want to be able to pronounce things correctly.
Must. That's strong.
Really strong. It comes across as her personal expert conviction. It's not just advice. It's like, this is absolutely critical from my perspective.
Speaker-driven obligation or very strong advice. Her personal insistence.
But she qualifies it a bit, she adds.
It's not universal.
Right. She says, you don't need to speak Cantonese in the bigger shops, but you'll need some basic phrases when you go shopping in the local market.
Okay, so don't need to for the big shops, lack of necessity there.
But definite need for the local markets. It's context dependent.
Shows the flexibility. Nice.
Then they get onto the more official stuff. Work permits.
Ah, the bureaucracy.
Claire tells him, nowadays you have to get a work permit before you go.
Have to. Clear external rule. Government regulation.
No ambiguity there, and she contrasts it with her time. We didn't have to worry about those when I was there.
Didn't have to. Past lack of obligation, the rules changed.
Exactly. And dress code for work.
Important in Hong Kong, I hear.
Apparently so. Claire warns, you mustn't dress too casually for work. Everyone dresses really well in Hong Kong.
Mustn't. Okay, that's a prohibition.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Not just advice like you shouldn't, it's this is not allowed or strongly frowned upon. A social rule.
A definite don't. Got it.
Just a couple more quick tips from Claire before they finish. Guidebooks.
Does he need them before he goes?
Claire says, you needn't buy lots of guidebooks before you go. You can get great ones there for a fraction of the price.
Needn't. Lack of necessity again. Save your money.
Precisely. It's optional. But then she adds,
Something else he should do.
kind of. Also, you ought to take lots of passport photos with you. You'll find you need lots to fill in any application forms.
Ought to. Okay, similar to should. Practical advice.
Yeah, based on her experience, this is the sensible thing to do to avoid problems later.
Makes sense. Lots of forms, lots of photos needed.
And her very last line to Jack, it's quite fun.
What is it?
She says, you must invite me to visit you.
Huh. Must. Again. Not a rule, obviously.
No, but it shows that speaker's strong desire. It's a friendly command almost. Her personal wish stated very strongly.
Perfect example of how must can express the speaker's will.
So yeah, this whole conversation is just packed with these modals used in really natural ways.
It really is. It gives us a fantastic practical starting point to now sort of formalize our understanding. We can break down why certain words were used.
Okay, so we've seen them in action. Let's dig into the mechanics. Obligation, necessity. It's about feeling compelled to do something, right?
Exactly. And as we saw with Jack and Claire, that feeling can come from inside, like Jack feeling he has to find a flat quickly.
Or it can come from outside, like the rule about needing a work permit.
Understanding that source internal versus external is really key to picking the right modal.
So the main players we're dissecting are must, mustn't, have to, have got to, and need to.
Right. We heard you'll need to allow time for jet lag, practical necessity.
You have to get a work permit, external rule.
You mustn't dress too casually, prohibition.
Okay, let's focus on must versus have to or need to. These seem close but aren't the same.
They're not. First, a quick grammar point. Must is a pure modal. It doesn't change form. It's always must. He must, she must, they must.
Right. Nus on the end for third person singular.
Correct. And the main difference in meaning, must, is often used when the obligation comes from the speaker.
Like Claire saying, you must invite me. That was her strong personal wish.
Exactly. Or a parent saying, you must be home by 10. The speaker is imposing the rule or expressing a strong personal requirement. It feels quite direct, quite strong.
Okay, so speaker's will or strong personal feeling. What about have to and need to?
These are much more common for external obligations, rules, laws, situations that force you to do something.
Like the work permit example. You have to get a work permit. That's the law talking, not Claire personally.
Precisely. The obligation comes from outside the speaker. It's impersonal. Need to often functions very similarly to have to for these external necessities.
And you mentioned have to is generally more common in conversation than must for these external things.
Yes, generally. If I need to go to the bank because it closes soon, I'd probably say I have to go to the bank. Saying I must go might sound a bit more formal or perhaps imply a very strong personal mission. Have to feels a bit more neutral for everyday external necessities.
Gotcha. And have got to. We heard Jack use that.
Yes, I've got to find somewhere. Very common in spoken English, especially British English, for obligation. Often feels a bit more informal and can emphasize immediacy or urgency.
So must often feels more personal or formal. Have to is common for external rules. And have got to is informal spoken English.
That's a good summary. Oh, and one other place you see must a lot is on signs and official notices.
Right, like safety helmets must be worn.
Exactly. In that context, must conveys a very strong, non-negotiable official rule. It sounds more authoritative than have to in writing.
Okay, this next point you mentioned is super important and apparently a common mistake area. Tenses.
Huge. Absolutely huge. Okay, so for present obligation, you can use must, have to, have got to, need to, lots of options.
But for the past and the future.
Only have to or need to. You cannot use must to talk about past or future obligations.
So Claire's friend, he had to get up early, not he must get up early in the past.
Correct. And for the future, Claire said, you will have to learn some Cantonese. Not you will must learn. That's just grammatically wrong.
So must is stuck in the present when it comes to obligation.
Essentially, yes, for obligation. You need had to or needed to for the past and will have to or will need to or going to have tone to for the future. Remembering this avoids a really common error.
Good tip. And another trap. Questions.
Right. We generally don't make questions about obligation using must or ought to.
So asking must I fill in this form sounds weird.
It sounds quite formal, maybe a bit archaic or unnatural in most conversations. The standard way is to use do or does or did with have to or need to.
Like Jack asked, do you think I should take lessons?
Yeah.
Using should for advice. Or if you were asking about rule, he might ask, do I have to get a visa?
Exactly. Do I have to or do I need to? Are the natural ways to ask about necessity or obligation, not must I or ought I to.
Okay, that's really useful clarification. So we've covered what is required. What about when something isn't? The lack of obligation.
Right, moving on to no obligation. The main ways we express this are with not have to, not need to, or needn't.
Like Claire saying you needn't buy lots of guidebooks.
Exactly, meaning it's not necessary. You have the choice. Buying them is optional.
And this leads us to that absolutely critical distinction, the one you flagged earlier.
Yes. The mustn't versus don't have to confusion. This is probably one of the most important takeaways. They are not the same.
Okay, break it down for us. Mustn't.
Mustn't means it is not allowed, full stop. It's a prohibition, a negative command.
Like Claire's warning. You mustn't dress too casually for work. It means casual dress is forbidden or strongly advised against.
Precisely. Or a sign, you mustn't park here. Parking is prohibited. There will likely be consequences if you do.
Okay, clear. Prohibition. Now, don't have to.
Don't have to means it is not necessary. It expresses an absence of obligation. You have a choice.
Like the MTR example. You don't have to wait for ages. Doesn't mean waiting is forbidden. It means waiting isn't required because the trains are frequent.
Exactly. No penalty for waiting if you wanted to, but it's not needed. You have the freedom not to wait.
So the difference is huge. Mustn't is don't do it, while don't have to is you don't need to do it, but you can if you want.
Perfectly put. One is a rule against something. The other is freedom from a requirement. Mixing them up can cause major misunderstandings. Imagine telling someone you mustn't pay when you mean you don't have to pay.
Yeah, one sounds illegal, the other sounds free. Big difference.
Massive. Okay, what about lack of obligation in the past?
Claire said we didn't have to worry about work permits.
Right. Didn't have to or didn't need to are used when the obligation simply wasn't there in the past. It wasn't necessary.
But there's another form, isn't there? Needn't have.
Ah, yes. Another point of subtle distinction. Didn't need to versus needn't have.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Didn't need to implies it wasn't necessary, and therefore you didn't do the action.
Example.
My friend gave me a lift, so I didn't need to call a taxi. I recognized it wasn't necessary, so I didn't make the call.
Okay, so the action didn't happen. What about needn't have?
Needn't have plus past participle means you did the action, but later you realized it was unnecessary.
Ah, so you did it, but it was a waste of time or effort.
Exactly. For example, I needn't have called a taxi because my friend arrived just as I picked up the phone. I made the call, or was about to, but it turned out to be unnecessary. The action happened, or almost happened, but it was redundant.
So didn't need to, wasn't necessary, so didn't do it. Needn't have, he did it, but it wasn't necessary.
That's the core difference. It's about whether the unnecessary action was performed or not.
And for future lack of obligation.
Much simpler. Just won't have to or won't need to or not going to have tone to.
Like, good news, you won't have to come in early tomorrow.
Perfect. Straightforward, lack of future necessity.
Okay, that covers obligation and its absence really thoroughly. Let's shift gears slightly to the softer side. Suggestions and advice.
Right. Moving away from rules and requirements to recommendations, the main players here are shouldn't and ought not to.
We heard Claire use should quite a bit, like, you should try and use the MTR.
Exactly. It conveys, I think this is a good idea for you. It's advice based on her opinion or experience.
And she also used ought to. You ought to take lots of passport photos.
Yes. Ought to is very similar to should, often interchangeable. Ought to can sometimes feel a little stronger, perhaps implying a bit more moral or practical correctness, maybe slightly more formal.
But essentially both are used for giving advice or recommendations.
That's right. And for negative advice, we mainly use shouldn't.
Like, you shouldn't dress too casually for work.
Correct, meaning I advise you not to do this, it's probably not a good idea. It's advice against an action, not a strict prohibition like mustn't.
Now, you mentioned must can also be used for advice. That seems counterintuitive after discussing it for strong obligation.
It can seem that way, but yes. Must can be used for very strong advice or a recommendation that the speaker feels extremely passionate about.
So it's like dialing the advice up to maximum intensity.
Exactly. Think of Claire's final line, "You must invite me to visit."
That wasn't a rule, but it was her expressing a very strong personal desire, framed as advice or an expectation.
Or like saying to a friend about a film, "You must see it. It's incredible."
Perfect example. It's not an order, but it conveys incredibly strong enthusiasm and recommendation. It elevates the advice beyond a simple should. It implies it's almost essential from the speaker's point of view.
So must for advice is about the speaker's strong feeling or urgency behind the recommendation.
Precisely. It adds a layer of personal insistence.
Okay, we've got the core meanings down. Now, how can we fine-tune these statements? You mentioned adverbs.
Yes, adverbs are great for adding nuance. Things like always, never, sometimes just, only, also. And the key rule is where they go.
They go after the modal verb. This is important for sounding natural.
So Claire said, you should always carry loose change. Always comes after should.
Correct. You wouldn't say you always should carry. It sounds wrong. Or you must never forget. Never after must.
Simple rule, but important for fluency. What about adding emphasis?
For that, we often use really. And really, when used for emphasis like this, usually comes before the modal or the main verb.
Like the Star Ferry example. You really have to see it.
Exactly. That really bumps up the intensity. It's not just you have to see it. It's you absolutely genuinely have to see it. It makes the recommendation much stronger.
So really acts as an intensifier placed before the verb phrase.
Yes. When used that way, it adds significant punch.
Okay. And moving beyond conversation, how did these modals function in more formal writing, like academic papers or reports?
They become incredibly important. They allow you to express opinions, make recommendations, or state requirements in a way that sounds authoritative, considered, and appropriately formal.
So instead of saying, I think companies should, which is too personal,
you'd write something like, companies need to consider cultural differences. Using need to frames it as a necessary condition for success, giving it more weight.
Or governments should take advice from experts.
Right. Should suggests a reasoned, advisable course of action, more objective than I think they should. These modals add a level of formality and analytical distance.
They lend authority and a sense of measured judgment to formal writing.
Absolutely. They're crucial tools for crafting persuasive and credible arguments in those contexts.
Okay, so they're versatile, powerful in chat, essential in formal writing. Now, let's put it all together by looking at common mistakes and working through some exercises. This is where we really solidify things.
Definitely. Seeing the common errors helps avoid them, and applying the rules cements understanding. Let's look at some underline the correct word type exercises first.
Good idea. That must not versus don't have to one comes up again, I bet.
Almost certainly. Imagine. Passengers don't have to speak to the driver while the bus is moving.
That's got to be must not. It's a safety rule, a prohibition.
Exactly. Don't have to means speaking is optional, which isn't the intention. Or how about, in this job, you don't have to wear a suit, but you should look smart.
It's don't have to. Wearing a suit isn't necessary, but there's still an expectation of smartness.
Perfect. You're showing the lack of necessity for the suit, contrasted with the advice. Should look smart.
What about tense errors?
Okay, try this. Yesterday, I must have to finish the report before I left work.
Past tense, external deadline probably, so had to.
Correct.
No.
Must is wrong for past obligation. And that other tricky past distinction, didn't need to versus needn't have.
Right. Let's see an example.
I needn't have watered the plants because it rained heavily overnight.
It rained, so watering wasn't necessary. Did I water them? If I didn't water them because I saw it had rained, it's didn't need to water.
Exactly. You realized the lack of necessity and didn't do the action.
But if I did water them and then saw it had rained heavily, making my watering pointless, it would be needn't have watered.
You've got it. It hinges on whether the unnecessary action was performed.
Okay, let's try some gap fills. Scenario. Friend A says, I'm going to buy a map. Friend B replies, oh, you buy one, I have one you can borrow.
What fits there?
Don't have to, needn't, or don't need to. All mean it's not necessary anymore.
Good. How about, to work legally in this country, you get a work visa.
That sounds like a firm rule. So have to, maybe must, or need to. Have to feels most natural for an external legal rule.
Agreed. Have to fits perfectly there. Now, the school uniform question we touched on earlier.
Right. Question. You wear a uniform at your old school. Answer. No, we wear one, but the boys wear ties.
Okay, fill those gaps.
The question about the past rule. Did you have to wear? The answer, lack of general rule. No, we didn't have to wear one, but a specific rule for boys. But the boys had to wear ties.
Excellent. Question form, past lack of obligation, and past specific obligation, all using have to correctly. One more. I put the cake in the oven 10 minutes ago. I forget to take it out.
That sounds like a strong reminder to oneself. I mustn't forget. A self-imposed prohibition based on past disasters, probably.
Exactly. That internal, don't let this happen.
And let's quickly revisit those academic writing corrections. They highlight common formal errors.
Right. Spot the error. Governments must act quickly.
It's the two. Should just be must act. Modal plus base verb.
Correct. How about, students also should check their work carefully.
Adverb placement. Should also check adverb after the modal.
Yep. And we ought finish this project by Friday.
Missing to. Ought to finish. Always needs to.
Always. Error. In the 19th century, children must work long hours.
Past obligation. Needs had to work.
Correct. Error. The council should considering building a new park.
Wrong verb form. Should consider. Modal plus base verb.
Right. Again, error. Maybe we must change our plans.
Double modal. Incorrect. Will have to change. Or maybe just must change, or may have to change, depending on certainty.
Good options. And finally, to save water, we mustn't leave the tap running unnecessarily.
Is leaving it running forbidden, or just unnecessary if we want to save water? If it's advice about avoiding waste, it should probably be, we don't have to leave, or we shouldn't leave. Mustn't sounds too much like a strict rule in this context.
Precisely. It highlights that critical meaning difference again. Mustn't for prohibition, don't have to or shouldn't for a lack of necessity or negative advice.
Okay, last big review. That travel advice exercise, it pulls everything together.
It does. It starts with the teacher asking, what do you have to think about? Correct question form for necessity.
And the student replies with a mix. You have to consider lots of things. You have to have enough money.
External necessities. Gotta have money, gotta think about things.
You ought to work a bit first.
Sensible advice using ought to.
Then the bit about traveling alone. You don't have to travel with a friend, but it is probably safer.
Perfect. Lack of necessity. Don't have to. Contrasted with advice. Probably safer. Choice. but with guidance.
And cultural rules. You mustn't shout. You must always walk clockwise around a temple.
Clear prohibition, mustn't, and strong cultural obligation, must always. No ambiguity.
And finally, you ought to find out these things before you go. You have to have a visa, so you ought to organize that before you go.
Beautifully sums it up. General advice, ought to find out, leads to a hard requirement, have to have a visa, followed by practical advice on dealing with that requirement, ought to organize.
It really shows how these modals work together to convey complex information precisely.
It absolutely does. We've gone from a simple chat about Hong Kong to really unpacking the nuances of how we express these core concepts.
Well, that brings us towards the end of this deep dive. We have covered so much ground.
We really have, from the core meanings must, have to, need to, for obligation and necessity, should, ought to, for advice.
To that vital difference between mustn't for prohibition and don't have to for lack of necessity.
Plus, how to use them correctly in different tenses, in questions, and in more formal settings.
The main takeaway, really, is that mastering these isn't just about avoiding errors.
No, it's about gaining control. It's about expressing yourself with real precision and confidence.
Knowing exactly which word fits the situation, whether you're giving firm instructions, gentle advice, or just saying something isn't needed.
It empowers your communication significantly.
So the challenge for you listening is start noticing these words more. Actively listen for them.
Yeah, pay attention. When someone uses must versus have to, what's the subtle difference in feel? Where does the pressure seem to come from?
And think about your own usage. Are you choosing the most precise word?
And perhaps a final thought to ponder. If must often connects to internal drive or speaker authority, and have to points more to external circumstances, well, how much of what we do each day feels driven by our own musts versus the world's have-tos?
That's a deep one. Are we driven more by internal conviction or external pressures?
And how does simply changing that one little modal word potentially shift the feeling, the responsibility, even the reality of an obligation or a piece of advice? Language shapes perception.
It certainly does. Something to think about.
Definitely.
Until next time, keep diving deep.